Hi, welcome back to StrataGames. I'm Jason, and today I'm going to be showing you my favorite commander deck that I've ever built. And no, it's not some nefarious stacks build, nor is it janky tribal. It is a 5-color deck that casts spells that allow it to cast other spells for free, and of course, payoffs for casting several spells. This is a hard deck to understand theoretically, so let's get right into the deck list. First, let's look at the main ways we're going to be able to maintain casting additional spells for free every single turn. Whenever you cast a spell, Maelstrom Nexus, Sunbird's Invocation, Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, and Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter all give you a chance to cast a second spell from your library. Mind's Dilation gives you a chance at a free spell whenever your opponents cast one. Yannette, Cryptic Sovereign, Etali, Primal Storm, Yidris, Maelstrom Wielder, and Maelstrom Archangel all allow you to cast additional spells when they attack or when they deal damage to a player. And Nicol Bolas, Godpharaoh, in addition to stripping your opponent's hand and dealing with their creatures, can cast spells from your opponent's libraries for free each turn. These are key cards in the deck, allowing you to cast spells for free every turn that your opponents don't deal with them. We're also running a handful of cards that have one-time effects, which allow you to cast additional spells. Several of these cards feature everyone's favorite laundry detergent, Cascade. At one point, this deck had tons of Cascade cards, but I've trimmed it down to only the best. The best being either very cheap, Shardless Agent and Bloodbright Elf, recurable, Ethereum Horn Sorcerer and Enigma Sphinx, or allowing you to Cascade multiple times, Maelstrom Wanderer and Apex Devastator. Maelstrom Wanderer also grants your creatures haste, which is extremely important to make sure you get use out of your creatures before a board wipe is cast. Other cards that let you cast additional spells are Diluvian Primordial, Gonti, Lord of Luxury, and Release to the Wind, which allows you to re-trigger any cast or ETB trigger, including Cascade. Finally, a card I have not yet gotten to try in this deck, but is definitely going in the moment my mom gives me my next allowance, is Fevered Suspicion. While fairly expensive, this card will cast a total of 4 cards, assuming you have 3 opponents, and then will do the same on the following turn. Now you've seen how we can cast tons of spells, so let's look at the payoffs for doing so. Jorian Ruin Diver, Vega the Watcher, Joyra Weatherlight Captain, Zendikar Resurgent, and Whirlwind of Thought all let us draw cards for casting spells, keeping our hand well stocked. And I know you might think it's weird that Whirlwind of Thought and Zendikar Resurgent draw you cards for casting opposite types of spells, but honestly we'll be casting so many spells of all different types that both of them will draw us plenty of cards. General Ferrus Recuric and Primeval Bounty can quickly amass an army by casting spells, but no, not the zombie kind. Tidespout Tyrant can remove pesky blockers, or if you're desiring to slim down the number of friends you have, all of your opponent's lands. Vile Smasher the Fierce can dome your opponents for lots of damage, and we already have a few cards that incentivize your first spell to have a higher converted mana cost and reward you for casting spells on not just your own turn. Eric's Mathis counts as ramp, but can also be a huge beater almost immediately. This deck can easily cast 5 spells by the following turn's combat step. While I will say this is not a storm deck, Aetherflux Reservoir is too good to not include. I've gained over 100 life in a single turn off of it, and it's just so darn fun. Ramos Dragon Engine can give us the mana to keep our engine going, and while not specifically a spell's casting payoff, Zakama Primal Calamity will untap all our lands even if we cheat cast him with any of these cards. Now that I've discussed the core of the deck, let's get into the other categories that make the deck function, starting with card draw. Muldrifter works well in this deck because even if you evoke it, its CMC will be 5, which matters for Sunbird's Invocation, Rashmi, and Maelstrom Nexus. Brainstorm can help you set up cards to cascade into, and Rishkar's Expertise will draw you tons of cards off your giant creatures and cast a second spell to boot. And in my decks, I often include recursion spells as draw spells because really, they're just giving you the best cards back from your graveyard. Eternal Witness is a great Cascade hit, and Seasons Past and All Sun's Dawn will allow you to reclaim several spells from your graveyard all at once. Lastly, for card draw, and probably most important, is Teamer Ascendancy. It's extremely cheap, making it easy to cascade into. It can generate tons of cards from General Ferrus Recuric and all your other giant creatures, and Haste, as previously mentioned, is king in this deck, since a single card can generate an entire board of creatures. Now let's talk ramps. We are a 5-color deck, which means we're going to want Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, Faber Elder, and Chromatic Lantern. Farseek, 3 Visits, and Sakura Tribe Elder can each fetch lands of any color, and we are a commander deck period, so I am legally obligated to run Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and because I'm red, Dockside Extortionist. As far as removal in this deck, we have to be very particular about the cards we include, because we can cascade into a random removal spell at any time. That means we want our removal to be as flexible as possible, making it worth casting it basically any time in the game. Beast Within is probably the most versatile removal spell, period, being able to hit any type of permanent. Anguished Unmaking is almost as unrestricted, though can't take out lands. And we are running Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares because there's often a creature worth getting rid of, and it allows our Shardless Agent to act as a removal spell sometimes. Worldbreaker won't often get cascaded into, but when it does, even if there are no artifacts or enchantments on the battlefield, it can take out a problematic land, plus we can bring it back if we need to for more cast triggers in the future. And the last removal spell I had in the deck was Despark for a while, but even the restriction of CMC 4 or greater isn't really where we want to be, so I swapped it out for a Generous Gift, which is essentially a second Beast Within. And even more than our removal, our board wipes need to be very specifically chosen. We never want to decline casting a spell from a Cascade trigger, so building up a board right before cascading into a Damnation would be a waste. For that reason, our board wipes are either expensive with cost reductions, lowering the likelihood they'll be cascaded into, Blasphemous Act and Sublime Exhalation, or the board wipe has other uses than simply killing creatures. Merciless Eviction and Cleansing Nova can choose to remove something other than creatures if desired. Finally, Realm Cloaked Giant counts as a 7-drop in terms of Cascade, and if we have the best board presence anyway, we can just add a 7/7 Vigilance to the board instead of clearing it. The last spell in the deck is Karn's Temporal Sundering. The 99 includes 15 legendary creatures and 1 Planeswalker, making it likely we'll be able to cast it, and it basically acts as a haste enabler, plus a Zakama ETB, and a Disperse, plus also a card draw. It's very strong. Finally, let's look at the mana base. As we always say, even with a 5-color deck, just play whatever mana base you have. When I first built the deck, I played a lot of Temples, Tango lands, Tri-lands, and Cycling lands. Over the last few years, I managed to amass some Battlebond lands, Fetch lands, and Shock lands, so I use those now, but play whatever you have. Just keep in mind that Spells Matter cards are generally going to skew towards Teamer colors, so having more lands that tap for blue, red, and green is going to make your deck more optimal. As for non-dual lands, we have Command Tower and Path of Ancestry, but I've opted against playing Mana Confluence and City of Brass. I feel like my mana is generally good enough already, and I'd rather not lose life repetitively for mana. I run a single copy of each basic land to accommodate Steve and anyone who might want to path one of my creatures. Since this is a 5-color deck, we can only afford to put the very best utility lands in it, and in my opinion that's Field of the Dead, since literally every one of our lands has a different name, Reliquary Tower because this deck draws a lot of cards, and Mosswort Bridge because it's a land that can cast spells for free, and it's not hard for this deck to get 10 power on the board. All told, there are 37 lands in the deck, which I feel gives us the best opportunity to not get screwed, while still allowing us to get 10 to 12 mana in the very late game. And now that we're finished with the 99, I'm sure you're confused as to why I never said who the deck's commander is. And the reason for that is, it's really not that important. This is not a deck where the commander is integral to the game plan. The commander I run is Golos Tireless Pilgrim because he has an ability that lets you cast additional spells for free. But when I first built the deck in 2019, my commander was Joda, Archmage Eternal, to cast my expensive spells at a discount. And when I first had the inception of this deck, I planned to use many more Evoke creatures and have Horde of Notions as the commander because it casts spells for free too. But in the last few years, we've also had Esika, God of the Tree, Garth One-Eye, and Niv Mizzet Reborn, who all would probably be decent commanders for this deck with just a little bit of tweaking. There are so many ways you could build this deck. Go heavy into Eldrazi to benefit from their powerful cast triggers, go deeper on Cascade and include cards like Averna the Chaos Bloom. The possibilities are endless, but I do have a few suggestions if you plan to build a deck anything like this. First, do not include any X spells. I initially thought Villainous Wealth would be a great card for this deck, but cascading into it or otherwise casting an X spell without paying its mana cost makes X equal to 0, which is totally useless. Similarly, do not include Converge spells or any spells that ask if you've paid a certain type of mana to cast them. Just like X spells, you will have paid no mana to cast them, so they will be useless. Bring to Light is another card I put in the deck, only to realize its anti-synergy. Do not include any cards where you primarily want to be paying an alternative cost. Cascading into a Cyclonic Rift, for example, will allow you to bounce a single permanent and not the entire board. Things to keep in mind. Spells that get cheaper will still trigger Rashmi, Sunbird's Invocation, Vile Smasher, and Cascade with its original mana cost. So if I Blasphemous Act for a single red mana, I still get those triggers for casting a spell with 9 CMC. For this reason, Delve, Undaunted, Affinity, Evoke, Convoke, Suspend, Phyrexian Mana, and lots of other abilities could be considered when building this deck. Also, look at abilities that allow you to cast 2 spells off a single card, such as Flashback, Jumpstart, Adventure, Aftermath, Rebound, and of course, Cascade. Also keep in mind that you don't want to be running counter spells, redirects, or any other cards that are going to be situation dependent, because if you cascade into them, there's no guarantee that that situation will actually be happening. Through the games I've played, I believe this deck is probably a 7 or maybe an 8 in terms of power level. It takes a little bit to get going, but it can be extremely explosive, and it can recover very nicely from a board wipe with just a single spell cast. And that is my favorite commander deck, and the deck that I don't think I will ever get tired of playing. There's so many synergies between 2 or more cards that I've thought intensely over and decided to put in for that specific purpose. There are cards that are good in the deck that I've taken out because they lack those specific synergies. There's just so much that can be done with this deck and a million different ways you can build it. So I really hope you enjoyed this deck tech. If you're interested in my deck list, go ahead and check the link in the description. And if you decide to make a deck like this, please share the link with me because I would love to see what you've done with it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.